All right. Hello, everybody. Very happy. Hey, I'm very happy that we are going to have a really lawful follow-up to last week's presentation by Colin Lowry, the son of Graham Lowry, a master historian and poet. And I think that, as Uwe has noted as well, one cannot do poetry without history and history without poetry. And I think that both Graham Lowry and Colin have really lit many fires that have resulted in some creative discoveries that I am thankful for. Many of the greatest historians that I know in our present era who have made big insights and discoveries into the science of history. This this very strange field that has been really obscured from popular acceptable approaches to education. Have all tapped into this very same set of insights and have in many cases used Graham Lowry's work, which really relied upon an appreciation that there is a battle of ideas, right? And that higher ideas respecting human beings, God, nature, whether right or wrong, that is the domain of causation, causality that affects the unfolding of actions and dates and events in the material world. And many people have missed that fact, but it really opens up the door to many vistas of great insights into truth. It opens up a better insight into the nature of the world we live in, and it helps us also plan and understand how to navigate through a lot of the misinformation, the lies, the sophistry that have been flooded into our zeitgeist that is otherwise clouding our ability to understand why we're in a crisis, or let alone think through a solution. So again, the clash of ideas respecting different factions that view human beings, view nature, view the universe in completely opposing terms, where one side views human beings made in the image of a creator, and that creator being a being endowed by reason, committed to justice, beauty, truthfulness. That is a very opposing idea from the faction which has striven, is that even a word, to keep human beings confined to a status not dissimilar from that which Plato described in his Republic, in the allegory of the cave, shackled forever, believing that the shadows cast upon the cave wall are all that reality offers and nothing more. So Uwe, who has graced us with many wonderful presentations, is going to continue this thread that we began to pull on last week, and this time with a little bit of a look towards the Republican networks, often completely, again, overlooked in modern historical books throughout Europe, that ties the best of the United States, the best of Europe together in a common struggle against empire. And I'm going to take my notebook out, and like usual, once Uwe is finished with his formal remarks, we'll shift gears for a dialogue with the audience. So like usual, just pop your name in the description box, and we'll have a Q&A accordingly. I'll call upon names. And if you want me to read your question out loud for you, just make that clear and make your question short in the chat box. Otherwise, Uwe, thank you so much for doing this, and the stage is all yours. And yep.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much, everyone, for sparing time, for making time for me, for my presentation tonight. I'm very much looking forward to this as well. I'm a bit excited, a bit nervous even, because I'm going to be using a little bit of application which I haven't been using in presentations so far, but I found that it is more, it's more of an experience this way, and I hope it will work out. In the introduction, Matt has pointed out that, he has said that I will explore battles of the past and will focus on the connections between European and American conspirators with a look towards our present crisis-ridden age. And that's exactly what I came from when I offered to give you a heads up on what I am working on at the moment, because it is exactly this question of what's going on and what is the relevance of all this wonderful history which we've been hearing about. So this is what I've given much thought to over the past couple of years already, since I was invited to join these talks on the Rising Tide Foundation, and I'm going to show a little bit of even how this came about, because it will also serve, I believe, to get an understanding of what I'm trying to do, and that is to make clear to the audience, especially the audience outside of the United States and outside of America, the continent, so that is Europe in particular, but also other continents, that in my view, it is really important to take on and to take home the message which I found very well explained and versed in Graham Lowry's book, How the Nation Was Won, and that is in effect that the foundation of the United States, so the project of creating a republic in America, had been a fallback position. That's not how he termed it, but that's essentially what it means, at least in my understanding, a fallback position when those who had been trying to achieve a republic, to setting up a republic in Europe, realized that they could not succeed, at least for the time being, after Queen Anne died and George the First, and so the Hanoverian George the First accessed the British throne. That's when those plans to start the Republican project in America really got going. Although, even though that it is true that creating a nation, creating a Republican structure, had been on the minds of many of the pilgrims to the colonies from very early on, so Massachusetts Bay and all this, you know this. So the thing is that when Queen Anne died, after Sophie of Hanover also died, who was next in line of succession, this meant that Gottfried Leibniz would very likely not become Prime Minister of England or some other important position. In fact, he had hoped to be taken with George to London. He had even waited quite a while with George's wife, whom he was attending to in Hanover after George already was in London. But eventually he was told that he should not think about going to England. So the question of why this is important today has to do with the message, with the main the main message, in my view, which Leibniz has phrased, and he has built on many other scholars before him. He's built on Plato, he's built on Nicholas of Pisa, and Kepler and others, but Leibniz was very, very unique in explaining the necessity to use technological progress for achieving happiness. And happiness, as we've heard over the last presentations a couple of times, also by Mindy Petchenuk, I think it was 2 weeks ago, happiness is not the kind of happiness you think of when you ask yourself whether you want to have a pizza or spaghetti. Happiness is something deeper. I'm going to read a quote first from Leibniz. It's from his discourse on metaphysics. And he says there, towards the end of that text, he says, this is why this moral quality of God, which makes him the Lord or monarch of spirits, concerns him personally in a very unique way. It is in this that he becomes human, that he willingly suffers anthropomorphologies, and that he enters into society with us like a prince with his subjects. And this consideration is so dear to him that the unhappy flourishing state of his empire, so dear to him that the happy flourishing state of his empire, which consists in the greatest possible happiness of its inhabitants, becomes the supreme law of his government. For happiness is to persons what perfection is to beings. And if the first principle of the existence of the physical world is the decree to give it as much perfection as possible, the first purpose of the moral world, or of the city of God, which is the noblest part of the universe, must be to spread as much happiness as possible. So this is the thing which I want you to keep in mind when we go on. I'm going to share my screen in a moment with this new application, and I hope it will work out. So let me see. Yes, here we go. All right, so you can see my screen. Great, thanks. Okay, so this is I'm going to show a map. So, as I'm going to be talking about networks of people forgotten in history, and I deliberately started with this picture of me. Hang on, I need to make this. Yeah, because it is the present which I want to focus on in terms of understanding why it is important to really get the importance of Leibniz's project, or the project of the American Revolution and the Republic, and why it is important to understand what is essential of that, and why it is important to preserve it and to build on it, also for those of us who are not Americans, who are not within the United States. This may sound irritating or awkward at first for some people, but I think it will become clear later on. So I have been working, the way I met Matt Ehret and Cynthia Chung was by working on a project with Vera Sharaf, the Holocaust survivor, who many of you know, and so I was working with Vera. I had been working with Vera for almost 3 years when I met Matt and Cynthia, and this working with Vera is also the reason why my Substack is under the title of Never Again Is Now, because I was asked by Vera, who is, as I said, a Holocaust survivor, I was asked to help her in a project of hers, which was very important to her, to warn against what she saw being a possible or very likely repeat of what she had survived, and what some of her family had fallen victim to, and so when I accepted, or when I got this request by Vera to help her with this, she knew that I was a historian, and she wanted me to work on checking some facts, or most of the facts, which she would be processing. I felt obliged to do this. After all, I am a German, and though I'm very well aware that this is so the German past is something which is nothing where any of my generation has any form of guilt or something. It is something which has shown to us that it is important to be a good citizen, to be mindful of the importance of true democracy, and therefore I was very happy to help Vera. Anyway, in the course of this, and listening to Matt and Cynthia, this became also something which I understood, that the roots of the problem go back much further than what Vera and I were focusing on at first. And so in this way, I eventually shifted my focus on to understanding this deeper roots. So the true problem, which is the fight of empire versus the Commonwealth, versus the common well-being, the common good. So during this getting to know Cynthia and Matt and what they were working on, I also learned of people I had not heard about, like Lyndon LaRouche, or to be honest, I had heard about him, but that was 40 years ago when he was running for president as an outsider in America, which I learned about in the German press then, but no one was paying any attention to it, basically, or we were told not to pay any attention to it. But Matt, as you know, speaks a lot about how he was shaped in his view of the world by the philosophy and by the teaching of Lyndon LaRouche. So I also decided to look into that, and it was really, as most of you know, it was really, really mind-blowing. Anyway, so on this chart you see also the white rose with a connection to Vera, and that is, of course, the German resistance group, Weiße Rose, a group of students, not all of them students, but mainly students who worked underground in Nazi Germany, and who printed leaflets and distributed them, and urging the German population to wake up and to do what is necessary to stop the horror of Nazism. And in 2022, I had been to the graveyard where those brave students were buried in Munich. I had taken Vera to Nuremberg to speak at the 75th anniversary of the release of the Nuremberg Code, and then we went on to Munich, and she wanted to visit the graves of the White Rose, and she wanted to pay homage to those who had lost their lives. What I didn't know at the time when I was there is that I also was at the grave, or at the place where another man was buried, and that is Kurt Huber. So Kurt Huber, I have to see, that's what I mean. Here you see him. Kurt Huber was a professor. He was in fact, he was the professor of those students, of some of those students, of Hans and Sophie Scholl and Alexander Schmorell and others. but I didn't pay attention to his name because, you know, it's Hans and Sophie Scholl and maybe Alexander Schmorell and maybe some others, but Kurt Huber really hadn't made any impression on me. I should have paid attention though, because what I found out now, because when another friend whom I have just abbreviated here, because I had not asked him to give me his permission to release his name in this context. Anyway, so this friend, he recently sent me an article about Kurt Huber and Leibniz. And Huber is a professor of musics, of musical aesthetics. So therefore, it's not necessarily something where you would expect someone to be working also on Leibniz. But in fact, it is that Kurt Huber had been the preeminent Leibniz researcher, or the one who did or who boosted, revived the Leibniz research in Germany in the 20th century after it had also become almost forgotten. And Huber, he also was executed in 1944, and so he was not able to realize his plan of publishing a Leibniz biography and publishing a Leibniz systematical, the works of Leibniz in a systematical way. But this is something which I was really shocked about myself, realizing that I should have known about him, and I should have paid attention even back in 2022 about what he was working on and what he was thinking about. So I might have saved some time, and Leibniz is very close to Huber's, or was very close to Huber's thinking. And I want to quote a few sentences from Kurt Huber, from one of his essays, which he published, or which he wrote before the war, but he did not publish. It was published posthumously after he was dead by one of his colleagues. So Leibniz and we and Leibniz is the title of the essay, and Kurt Huber writes about this lively direction in Leibniz's thinking towards life itself, and thus towards everything concrete in its fullness, is also the root of everything that we summarize in Leibniz as the tendency towards the individual, as individualism in the proper sense, and which we must understand and evaluate as one of the cornerstones of his entire philosophy. Such individualism has nothing to do with the egocentrism of the individual, also incorrectly referred to as individualism, which condemned the bourgeois philosophy of the past decades. So this was written in the early 20th century. It condemned the bourgeois philosophy of the past decades to sterility. With the love of the old German master, i.e. Leibniz, the great man immerses himself in every detail of the universe. He does not think of forcing the world in its fullness onto the Procrustean bed of abstractions. However, the unity of meaning, which reveals all of the manifold to the deeper viewer in its togetherness, always remains a wonder to him. He can only ever comprehend this unity in diversity, the great problem of his philosophy, through the image of musical harmony, the harmonious coexistence of all parts of the universe in a higher whole, in a higher perfection than any of the individual parts possesses on their own. So these quotes, these sentences by Huber, and also the quote by Leibniz, I would like you to take to heart, as I had now really come to to be awed by this thinking and philosophy and by the way of looking at science. So anyway, so I hope you understand what I try to get across with the importance of understanding Leibniz and the American Revolution, which is a Leibnizian revolution in its essence, because many, as I will show, or you may even know already, many of those who fought for the American independence, achieved American independence, and continued to defend it, were deeply influenced by Leibniz. Okay, so with this, I will now skip back to the past, because you also see here Friedrich Schiller, who is linked in this view to Cynthia, and this has to do with the fact that Cynthia's essay on transhumanism was in effect that which really got me onto the classical philosophy and trying to understand really Friedrich Schiller's sentence or the meaning of his aesthetical letters, because I heard Cynthia quote the letters with this famous sentence of, "It is through beauty that one proceeds to freedom," which to many I speak to, they think it like I used to think it is. It's a very nice sentence. It is very naive, though. It has nothing to do with the harsh reality. Yes, it does, which I think everyone understands who will spend some time in trying to understand what Schiller was talking about and who he was influenced by. And it is going to be the same people we have talked about before. Okay, so here is the network as an overview of what I'm going to be talking about today. Please also understand I'm not making any claim to completeness. I will have left out many important names who you know or who should be included in this, but it's already a very vast network. It spans centuries, it spans continents, and therefore I had to make some decisions of whom to include and whom not to include. Maybe I also will have forgotten a couple of links between some of those who are in it. I've tried to link the most important ones, at least those who are most important to what I'm trying to get across. And again, I'm not claiming to give a complete overview of the whole matter. What I'm doing is I'm giving you an account of where I am at, coming from almost zero understanding of the whole issue, and trying and having spent the past 2.5 years trying to really speed up my my studies and my revision of history to get to where most of you are already today. Okay, so you saw Schiller. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Now we start with Plato again, and here it's a depiction. It's a presentation of Kepler and Plato, and there's another guy in there, Isaac Iselin, who is not that important at this point. He will become more important later. Although if I am going to speak about the American Revolution as perceived from a European perspective, Iselin is very important because he was one of the few who translated the news of what was happening in America at the time into, in this case, into German, because Iselin was a Swiss national. But here you see Kepler and Plato, and so those two are very much influenced. But of course, they are not the only ones. And Plato is not maybe not the first, but he's one of the most important in his Socratic method of thinking and of teaching and of acquiring education, so to bring forth what is within. Here you see the second dimension of this network, where we have Plato still at the middle, and we see Leibniz already in there. For some reason or other, I did even forget to make a connection between Leibniz and Plato, which of course is there, but at least there's one between Kepler and Leibniz. And when I go back to Kepler, we will see that Kepler is, or he should be, connected to another person of importance, which I realize I have. No, he's here. It's Nicholas of Cusa. Nicholas of Cusa, of course, also influenced Leibniz, as you know, and he was before Kepler, so Cusa influenced Kepler. I should have also made this connection there. Again, as I said, it is work in progress. It is something which I sit in front of my computer, and I am really excited about what comes to light, or what becomes evident, all those connections. And here we see basically a presentation of influence between Plato, Leibniz, Kepler, Cusa, with people like Johann Sebastian Bach in the musical realm. You remember the frequent mentions of the musical harmony, as Kurt Huber said, and also as Leibniz said, the harmony of the universe, of the cosmos, is of course something which is expressed in, or can also be expressed in musical terms, as Johannes Kepler and Nicholas of Cusa have pointed out and shown. And from this angle, it is clear that Leibniz, who was, and we also heard this in Mindy Pechinuk's talk 2 weeks ago, who was attacked by, in that video, by Leonard Bernstein, for his optimism that all was well, all was right, which he didn't say. Of course, we know this. It is a slanderous accusation designed to get people off of the thinking of the great humanists. Anyway, so Kepler, or Cusa, if we focus on him for a moment, Cusa is influenced, or has been influenced, by the Brethren of the Common Life, which was a sort of order, but it was lay people, so no monastic order. Later it became also a monastic in the Augustine order, but the Brethren of the Common Life were founded in Deventer in Holland in the 14th century by Gerhard Grote, who was from a well-to-do family. Deventer was a town of the Hanseatic Federation, so trade was big. Deventer was very wealthy, and Grote also was wealthy. He lost his family due to the plague at the time, and he started the Brethren of the Common Life, and this organization focused on the Devotio Moderna, which in effect did what also Leibniz later professed, is to understand that every human being is created in the image of God, imago viva Dei. So therefore, it is important to educate every human being and help them to fulfill their course in life, achieve their happiness. And of course, the Brethren of the Common Life were very much focused on following Christ, the example of Christ. Therefore, the Brethren were also concerned about having written material, so copied Bible and other religious text available, and that's why there was another need to educate the orphans, basically, which they were taking care of most and foremost, but also people who were not orphans, such as Nicholas of Cusa, were educated by the Brethren. And now we can have another look about this. We see here Erasmus of Rotterdam. He also was one of those who were educated by and influenced by the Brethren of the Common Life. So was Johannes Gutenberg, whom I have not, I realize in this moment, whom I have not included in this network, which I should have done, because Gutenberg, who learned about the technique of printing, probably from Nicholas of Cusa, who had gone to Constantinople to be an envoy to the Eastern Church, to bring them over to the Council of Basel, and Constantinople, of course, was big in a trade with Asia, and there they knew that in China printing was already a well-developed technique, and so it is very, very likely that Nicholas of Cusa and Johannes Gutenberg, who both were at Mainz at the same time in the 15th century, influenced each other. So Nicholas of Cusa probably giving Gutenberg some information about the state of printing, but also wanted printed material from Gutenberg later for his work. And so was Erasmus then a little bit later, and now we can focus on Erasmus here, where I have just included Thomas Morus, so Thomas More, who was also educated by or influenced by Erasmus, because Erasmus, as we know, he went to England as well. He was working with Thomas More to educate and prepare Henry VIII for his kingship. We all know that this did not work out well, because Henry VIII fell under the influence of the Venetian Aristotelians and Satanists, and Thomas More got executed over this. Erasmus did not get executed, but it was something where, as we will see here, we have also then Shakespeare being influenced by Thomas Morus very heavily in terms of his thinking, in terms of the importance of being true to your beliefs, of doing what is right, even if it means harm for your own personal well-being. So this is the stuff of which the plays of Shakespeare tell us a lot. They also tell us about the other side of despotism and tyranny. But I think it is fair, as I've heard that Thomas More's was not, or Shakespeare would not have been possible if Thomas More had not continued with his refusal to pledge loyalty to Henry VIII over God, and so that More did not cave in, that he rather accepted to be executed, was a very, very important piece in history and in learning in tragedy, which found its way into culture and the wider culture by Shakespeare. If we look at the next level of this connection, we then see, of course, Shakespeare, and here we have again Friedrich Schiller, 150 years later, or 200 years later, maybe even. We even see Abraham Lincoln, which is still further down the road, also, both being influenced by William Shakespeare, who both of them, Schiller and Lincoln, we know, were true believers in humanity, in humanism, in sovereignty, in the power of beauty, but also in the necessity or in the right to have your sovereign nation. Here we also have John Harvard, who was a fellow Stratfordian. I have heard in a talk which I listened to on the LaRouche archives, given by I think it was, well, no, I'm not going to speculate. So this talk said that probably John Harvard was Shakespeare, and I really find this intriguing because, of course, Shakespeare very likely is a pseudonym because he had to work underground. However, this particular the dates do not really match, because Shakespeare wrote plays and poems very early, at a time where John Harvard would have been still a very young boy. So therefore, I'm not too sure about whether it's true. But anyway, both are from Stratford. Both families knew each other, whoever Shakespeare eventually turns out to be, or whoever it was. And Harvard went on to America, to become a founder of Harvard University, which we see here. And from Harvard University, we will then get to Increase Mather, one of the important early founding fathers, or early people influencing and managing the Massachusetts Bay colony and the idea of nation building in America. So let's look at Increase Mather for a moment. Increase and Cotton Mather, sorry, that's what I was going to, because this will get us, again, please know and bear with me, there are many connections which should appear in this presentation, not included, because I'm trying to keep the focus on the European perspective, where I'm still at this moment. I'm aware I'm still very much in across the Atlantic in America. But here with Increase Mather, we see, with Cotton Mather, we see that he was, of course, connected to people like John Winthrop, who was the governor of Connecticut, so also involved in the project of nation building. And we see Benjamin Franklin, sure, but we also see then people like August Hermann Franke and Anton Wilhelm Böhm. And this is German names, and these are important people who worked in the European field who continued to work in the European field, even when the focus was shifting more to the Americas again. Now, Böhm, for example, he was a German. He was a Lutheran preacher. He did converse with Cotton Mather because he was relaying conversation. He was translating conversation of, for example, Leibniz into English, and the conversation between Cotton Mather and Leibniz. So here we have it. Hang on. Let's get this a little bigger. Yeah. Oh, Leibniz is not in. Oh, yeah. He is here. There's Leibniz. And Leibniz and Cotton Mather were in direct conversation, and Böhm was one of the people who put into writing for Germans what the two of them conversed about in Latin, but he also translated the conversations between Cotton Mather and August Hermann Francke into English. And Francke was also a Lutheran pastor. He worked in Halle, and so Halle is near Leipzig in Saxony, in Anhalt, in Germany, in central Germany. Böhm spoke English because he was at the court of Queen Anne. He was the preacher of Prince George of Denmark, who was the Queen's consort. So that's why Anton Wilhelm Böhm was in London, where he would then interact with people like also Jonathan Swift, whom we see here, and there should be a connection between the two of them also. With Queen Anne, we also see the Leibniz dimension very clearly, because Leibniz, on the other hand, was connected to Sophia of Hanover, who in her dimension, as you see here, she is, of course, connected to Queen Anne in the way that she would have been her successor had Anne not survived her by 2 months, coincidentally, which is a very strange thing that it should happen, because otherwise Leibniz very likely would have become prime minister and would have been in a position to shape the administration of the British Empire in a very different way. So here you see this whole dimension of the second degree of contacts of Leibniz in context of the British Empire. So Anne, you see the Old Pretender, James Francis, Edward Stewart. You see Jonathan Swift, who was connected to people like Alexander Spotswood, who would be the governor of Virginia, and Spotswood also would be connected to hang on, where James Logan, the secretary of William Penn, James Alexander, who himself was a Scot. He was a Scottish nobleman who was involved in the uprising of the Scotch in 1715 about the accession of George I on the English throne and also onto the Scottish throne. So the Jacobite uprising. James Alexander was involved in this as a young nobleman, and he then fled to New York, where he became acquainted with people in the colonies, especially Benjamin Franklin and others. We also have, where is he? I seem to have, sorry, let me check with Spotswood, and let's come back to Spotswood. Yeah, Robert Hunter, who was nominated as the governor of Virginia, but never took up his post because he was abducted, and later became then the governor of New York. He and Spotswood were very influential in opening up the Western expansion of the colonies into the American continent, which of course was very, very important for the whole project to build this nation in any meaningful and sustainable way, because you cannot just do with those 13 colonies on the East Coast. You would have to be aware of all the risk of being encircled from the north of Scotland and from the south and Louisiana. The French were there, so you had to develop the West, and this is something which was done by Spotswood and Hunter, among others. Now, especially Hunter, but also Spotswood, was involved in bringing over German immigrants to America. So Queen Anne had especially during the war of, was it the Dutch succession? Anyway, so the war of 1701, which affected the region of Palatinate in Germany, many refugees from that region, because the French devastated this southwest of Germany, and those people from the Palatinate were, of course, Protestants, and they fled to England, and many of them were then taken to America. And what I'm trying to see here, but I have not, hang on, sorry. I apologize for this. It's not there. Let me see. Yeah, Konrad Weiser. Konrad Weiser is a name I wanted to get to bring some context which may not be too familiar to you. Maybe it is, and I apologize, but it wasn't to me. Konrad Weiser was one of those refugees from the Palatinate region. He came over to America in 1709. He was not only connected to James Logan, but there should be a connection to Robert Hunter, the governor of New York at the time then, because they were taken to America to work as producers of tar for the British Empire, and he was a young boy when he came, and when he was 16, he was from his father. He was sent to live with the Mohawk First Nations, and he became very, very well acquainted with the Indian culture and languages, and he became an ambassador and interpreter for, among others, James Logan, as I said, who was the secretary to William Penn in Pennsylvania. But later he would also become familiar and acquainted with George Washington, who wrote an obituary when Conrad Weiser died in the 1750s as an older man already. Weiser, again, he was German. He came from a very simple background. The Palatinate people had to overcome a severe hardship in America because the British Empire did not care very much about those people they sent over there to work for them. Weiser eventually, he became connected to the family of the Mühlenbergs. The Mühlenberg, or Muhlenberg, as the English name is, they are also very prominent. They became very prominent mainly because Peter Mühlenberg was a general in Washington's Continental Army, but he was the son of Henry Mühlenberg, who was a preacher. And Henry Mühlenberg brings us back to Germany again, to August Hermann Francke. So Henry Mühlenberg was from the region of Göttingen and Halle in the middle of Germany. He was invited or asked to go to America by the people in London around Böhm and others. But he was educated by August Hermann Francke. Then his sons, he had 3 sons, as you see here. Henry Mühlenberg, he is the youngest, and he was later a scientist. The 2 others, Frederick and Peter, became involved in American continental politics and in the politics of the United States of America. So they were of German background. They were not of the kind of immigrants like the Weiser family, which I talked about just a moment ago. So Henry Mühlenberg was already in a different position. He went to America as a preacher to take care of all the German and other Lutheran denominations there. And from there, he and his family developed into quite a influential American Republican family, and I believe the last of the Mühlenberg family members who was involved in U.S. politics was someone who was in Congress in the 1950s. So that's how long they maintained their family tradition. Again, this all has to do with people like Anton Wilhelm Böhm and August Hermann Francke, who were connected to the Mathers, Winthrops, Washingtons, and others. Here is another name, Rudolf Erich Raspe, who is relevant in the later 18th century, towards the end of the 18th century. He is connected to Benjamin Franklin. Because Franklin, when he was in Europe in the 1760s, he also went to Göttingen, where there was the famous new university founded in the 1730s, of which Karl Friedrich Gauss, for example, is one of the prominent names, or the Grimm brothers, whom you may now know. But Benjamin Franklin went there because of Leibniz, who was not a professor in Göttingen. He was dead already. But Rudolf Erich Raspe, who was in a connection to Francke as well, because Raspe's father was an orphan, so he was educated at the orphanage of August Hermann Francke in Halle, and later became an engineer, or at least a civil servant in the mining business of the Kingdom of Hanover. And Raspe, his son, he became a scientist and researcher, and he discovered in the archives in Hanover in 1765, he discovered new forgotten documents by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who had died in 1716, and whose estate was sealed by the Hanoverians. Even his private estate was sealed, so none of the extensive communication and papers which Leibniz would have had and did have, we know today, and it is still not all been assessed and discovered. So it's a vast estate. And this was immediately when Leibniz died, who, as you know, was in conflict with the positivists like Isaac Newton and others. This estate became a state secret and was hidden. But Rudolf Erich Raspe, he discovered at least some of the material, and this became known to Benjamin Franklin, who at the time was in Europe, and he immediately traveled to Göttingen, met with Raspe, and then got access to most of the material which Raspe had discovered, and this is also relevant for the industrialization and the technological progress which Franklin propelled. Now, again, let's not lose ourselves in too much detail. Let's come back to, hang on, where did I have Franklin? No, Benjamin Franklin. Focus in on Franklin. This is his first degree of contacts in my presentation. There are many more contacts which are not included in this. We've talked about Leibniz to some extent. We've talked about Logan. Here is John Adams, who of course is another founding father. We've Hamilton, we've Matthew Carey. So all the names you know. With James Alexander, the Scotsman, who was also into technological progress, and he and Franklin, they exchanged thoughts about electricity, for example, thinking up experiments to measure the speed of the flow of electrical currents in various drafts. So one of the draft was because the time was too quick for a setting at some place on the spot. They thought about using the water as a conductor, and thought of measuring the speed of electricity when you put one end of an electrical current of an electrical line into the Potomac, and another one into the Atlantic coast, and you could then, because the distance is greater, you could then maybe have a calculation to measure the speed of electricity in theory. If this should not work, they even thought about going all the way around to the Gulf of Mexico with having the conductors in other rivers, as the Ohio and Mississippi River. So this is the kind of ideas which those guys exchange. You may laugh about it today, but it is something where they try to systematically access the laws of nature to improve man's power over nature, just in the way as Leibniz and others have said it is the thing to do to achieve happiness. Now, Raspe I've mentioned. Let's come to a little bit of culture, because I realize I've already been talking an hour and I don't want to bore you. I want to leave some time for for questions, and there are many more connections which we can explore. So there's these two names which I would like to delve in a little bit deeper. One is Mozart, who of course met Franklin when he was in Paris and was very much impressed by Franklin, who had of course also been an inventor of musical instruments. So the glass harmonia is an instrument which Benjamin Franklin invented in the 1760s. And Mozart attended some of the rehearsals, or the how do you say, the events of it being played, and he eventually composed a piece for glass harmonia himself, which if we have time we can listen at the end. So therefore Mozart is of course someone who's important in this context as a contact for Franklin, as a supporter of the American Revolution, where he was very explicit, and he also used his context. Let's take a look at whom I have here. Okay, so you have Otto von Gemmingen, who is who's important for the German National Theater. So therefore Schiller, who had his play staged in Mannheim at first, this was only possible because Otto von Gemmingen worked in Mannheim, where he met Mozart. Mozart was of course connected to Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, the son of Johann Sebastian Bach, which he was introduced to by Gottfried von Swieten, who also knew Beethoven, who is not in this dimension, but I believe he will be in the next one if I would go there. Schiller, again, I've said. There's Haydn, so Swieten, von Swieten, Baron von Swieten, he was a diplomat who traveled widely in Europe, and in Berlin he was introduced by, I believe, the Mendelssohn family to the music of Johann Sebastian Bach, which had already been forgotten at the time, and Swieten introduced both Haydn and Mozart to Johann Sebastian Bach, and he arranged a concert of Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach in Vienna, which Mozart conducted, and this is the cultural, so the aesthetic dimension of this, but there is also a political one, because all of them had been very sympathetic to the cause of a true national sovereignty, and even in some cases an explicit republican mindset. Now let's get back to Schiller, and Schiller will Schiller, who is of course also connected to the Grimm brothers, who were in the late 18th century, in the middle of the 18th century, who are among the 7 professors of Göttingen who protested against the revocation of the Hanoverian constitution, who were influenced by Gauss, also Gauss being in contact with, among others, Samuel Morse. Anyway, we have the Cotta publishing house, who were also connected to Henry Carey, because his material was in German published by Cotta. They, of course, were also the publisher of Schiller's works. We have Gotthold Lessing, who was connected to Moses Mendelssohn, not only to him, but also to Christian Daniel Schubert. And this is the guy who I wanted to speak about before I close this official. Hang on. Here we go. Christian Daniel Schubert. So he is a poet from Stuttgart, from Württemberg, so Swabia. He is a compatriot of Friedrich Schiller. He's older than Schiller, In fact, Christian Schubach has a son who, with Schiller, was at the Academy of the Duke of Württemberg, and this is how Daniel Christian Schubert became aware of Schiller, and how Schiller became aware of Schubert earlier than he was already a known poet. Schiller's Robbers, which was the first play which he staged in Mannheim, was influenced or inspired by a text which Christian Daniel Schubert had written 20 years earlier about two brothers who one was loved by the father, one was not, and the one who was loved by the father does him bad, and the one who was not loved by the father rescues him. So this is, of course, this story of also in the Robbers, but this is something which Schubert had conceived of in a different context, and Schiller later he refined it and made the Robbers out of it. Schubert, he was the poet laureate of the Duke of Württemberg, but he was also someone who was very, very reticent, and he was a very rebellious spirit. He was a musician as well, so that's why Schubert is also connected to Benjamin Franklin. Where have we? Yeah, he is Franklin and Schubert. Schubert was a musician, but he was also someone who was around at a place where the first German lightning rod was implemented. And of course, Franklin being the inventor of the lightning rod means that Schubert had also come across Franklin from this angle in Mannheim. Anyway, so this is just what I wanted to name drop here at this moment. Anyway, Schubert, he was a rebellious person, and he exposed not only the Duke of Württemberg for selling his troops, so his subjects to the British to be used as cannon fodder in the American War of Independence, but also the Duke of the Elector of Bavaria, of course the Hessians, so the Count of Hesse, and I believe also the Hanoverians were named in Schubert's chronicles, which he published as a journalist or as a chronicler in his days, and which eventually got him onto the hit list of the Venetians, because the Duke of Württemberg was heavily indebted to the Venetian oligarchy, as was the Austrian court, where the emperor at the time also pressed on the Duke of Württemberg to get Schubert away, and so he incarcerated him without any trial for 10 years in a Stuttgart prison. And Schiller later went to Schubert to visit him, and it is from Schubert that Schiller learned about America, because Schubert, as I said, he was a chronicler, he was a journalist, and he published a lot of material about the goings on in the revolution. And Schiller, in fact, it is said, it was reported by Schubert, Schiller, in fact, even himself thought about emigrating to the United States. This was something which I hadn't heard of before, but it is in the papers of Christian Daniel Schubert and others that Schiller had thought about in around 1783 or so, emigrating to the United States. He eventually did not, because he got married and had a family and stayed in Weimar. But I think it was very interesting to learn about this. Now, to close this, I would suggest to read you a couple of poems written by Schubert as I said, there are many more who are in this net, and maybe we can touch on them in the questions. But there are some poems of which I would like you to hear. One is called "The Oligarch's Poison." So this is proof of the very, very sovereign and very educated thinking of Christian Schubach. It says, "Heavy is the tyrant's fist, but as furiously as it strikes and abruptly ends our torment, it is not half as heavy as the oligarch's poison, slowly sending us to dying shadows." And then Schubert also wrote a freedom song of a colonist, which I think maybe you know it already, but I translated it. Out into the field of honor with flashing guns. Columbus, your whole world step forward boldly. The goddess Liberty with the flag. The slave never saw her. Go, brothers, see, she goes before us. Oh, bleed for her. Ha! Father Putnam steers the storm and shares the danger with us. His silver hair shines upon us like a lighthouse tower. You greedy Brit, speak scornfully to us? Take your gold. No citizen of Boston fights for slaves' pay. Behold the slaves of Europe, rattling in chains. They need a driver, a tyrant for strangled cattle. Do you offer your cowardly necks, you, to the trampling of the lust for power? Swim here, here dwells liberty, here burns its altar. But it isn't Father Putnam's beckoning us? Up, brothers, to arms! Whoever does not fight for our freedom shall be thrown into the sea. Come, Colombians, come, with faces red as the sun. Hear, Brit, our battle cry. It's victory or death. And to close the presentation, there is a poem which is called Franklin's Epitaph. Here lies in grave silence Franklin's shell, spirit, sage, patriot, full of country and God. He knew how to banish the rays of tyrants like lightning from the sky, and lure heavenly sounds from glass bells. Like a bride to her groom, freedom offered him her hand. Then he led her lovingly to Columbus' happy land. His name, free and great, flew across the ocean. Columbia mourns him, Europe laments him, the bold Frank covers himself in mourning. But Franklin's soul flew up to the primal light. Spirits rushed in droves, welcomed him and sang, "Whom God makes free is free forever." So this is it for the moment.
That was an incredible, powerful ending. And was that all of those poems you just referenced and read, were they all Christian Schubert?
Yes.
Wow. I had never even heard of this man. That's fantastic. And these are your translations into English of his poetry?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, please send them my way. We will publish that on RTF. That's fantastic.
Sure.
Wonderful, Uwe. Thank you so much. And indeed, your experimental presentation featuring the graphs connecting all of the faces. It's I've never seen this type of presentation done that way before. I really enjoyed it, and it really just reminded. I think it's a good reminder that these universal ideas are mediated through personalities, individuals who wrestled with their limitations, chose to be bigger than they were, and step onto the stage of universal history to make an amplification for in varying degrees of amplitude. And I think the personality of the individual is so important and often neglected in our modern sociological sort of theories of history that just negate completely the personality of those who express these universal ideas. So I really appreciate this, and I think it's very compatible with that reality. So really great approach. Few questions and thoughts that people are waiting to share with you. So I'll withhold my own questions for now. First person I saw who got in there early on was Marty, pertaining to a question of Sophia, Princess Sophia of Hanover. Martin, did you want to throw out your question or add anything additional to it? Oh, you're on mute. Everyone's on mute. Oh, and Richard is also asking, were we going to play a segment of music from the glass harmonica? So that's something that's going to be floating in the background as a question, Uwe. I'll let you decide. So yeah, Marty.
Again, first of all, Uwe, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation, so thorough. And again, for me, coming out of in Ireland, from the Anglo-American tradition of historiography, an education and a revelation of the huge depth and richness and interconnected nature of the true democratic enlightenment that spread out from Germany and was of such a central role, and which I see, Germany and German culture and German people are never given remotely credit for in the West. So a hugely important contribution. Thank you so much. And again, I find myself a bit embarrassing here because I've learned, especially from my friend Stephen, I see Stephen Doyle here. Stephen was of a Canadian. Well, everyone here knows, had an eminent career in the Canadian Air Force, and has a police, like my father did before me, has a policeman's and a detective's suspicious and skeptical turn of mind. So this is really your question, Stephen, but for once I preempt you to it. And that is, yeah, you've hinted at this, Uwe, and I'd very much appreciate your thoughts on it. The convenient timing of the death of the Electress Sophia, which had been staring me in the face. I mean, you're taught this in British and British-dominated schools. The Hanoverian takeover was a very good thing, and if it hadn't been George I, it would have been his mother, obviously, but there would have been no change. That's the way we were unthinkingly taught to see it. The Leibniz connection and the strong commitment of the Electress to democratic values, which her son most assuredly did not share, is never mentioned, is never raised. And again, as you said, this is a very fortuitous timing. And I was taught by a wonderful scholar, in fact, one of the great admirers and champions of President Franklin Roosevelt in Western historiography, Professor William Luchtenberg, as far as I know, still wonderfully with us, and he's now well over 100 years of age and still very alert. But he taught me at Oxford 55 years ago that the key to comprehension is chronology. You have to get the chronology right before you can start asking the right questions or pursuing the right lines of inquiry. And here you have done it again, because you point out only 2 months before the death, expected death, because she'd been ailing for a long time, as we both know, Queen Anne in Britain, the Electress Sophia dies ahead of her, clearing the way for the succession in Britain of George I. is this purely, the work of the divine, or are there non-divine human elements involved as well? Is poison and assassination a possibility?
Oh, Uwe, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yes. Thanks, Matt. Yeah. Thank you, Martin. In my view, absolutely is something which needs to be taken into serious consideration, although we will never be able to prove it conclusively. On the other hand, it is the so-called circumstantial evidence which will maybe solidify one or the other train of thought. And here we have not only the timing of the death, but we also have the prolongation of so Leibniz. Leibniz was in Vienna at the time of death of Sophia of Queen Anne. Sorry, and he immediately was advised by his Viennese friends that he must go back to Hanover because important tasks will wait for him now that George is going to be King of England. It took some time for Leibniz to get to Hanover, and 2 days before Leibniz arrived at Hanover, the king set off for England, or the future king set off for England. This is one coincidence. But his wife stayed behind, and his wife was also close to Leibniz, who was charged with educating her as well. And he had hoped that he would accompany her soon afterwards. But this journeys took months to eventually take off, and George's wife set off alone because Leibniz, but in the meantime, after a couple of months, by the prime minister of Hanover, Bernstorff, he received in no uncertain terms a clear order to never get anywhere close to London and stay behind. Yeah. So this is something which should give us food for thought. If we know that George was basically, he was a tool for the Venetian party. It's the Duke of Marlborough who was of course involved. He had just been ousted, or shortly before had been ousted by Queen Anne. And he was close to the Venetians. He was also in Hanover a couple of times before Anne's death. So therefore, we must expect that a lot of strings would have been pulled at the time to keep Leibniz out of the game.
If I may just add a further note, again, which has never occurred to me before, but again, is a direct result of your superb, such thorough scholarship, Uwe, and it is this. From the London side, we already have Isaac Newton is in a position of state security and major power because he is the master of the mint. It is the equivalent of being a combination of Secretary of the Treasury and director, or one of the directors, of the British deep state or secret service at the time. And Newton was very proactive in this. He personally supervised and clearly took even a twisted great pleasure in personally supervising the interrogation, which is to say the torture of suspects in the Tower of London when he was the keeper of the mint. He was also directly involved in pursuing an extremely tight and deflationary currency policy in England at the time, which and he is never blamed for this, but is directly responsible for delaying the Industrial Revolution in England for 50 years as a direct result of his repressive policies. And he worked closely with the Whigs.
Mm.
Secondly, and extremely importantly, you discuss the Duke of Marlborough, Winston Churchill's adored ancestor, who was a close ally of the Venetians, the champion of the war against France, and also was prodigal with the lives of not just English, but also of German and Dutch troops and soldiers in his bloody battles, only one of which was a victory, Blenheim, and even that was a very costly victory. All his other battles were at best draws, and the last one, Malplaquet, very bloody defeat. But he is very bitter at being fired by Anne. And in fact, George never goes quite as far as putting him back in charge of the British army and the activist British role in pursuing a war with France. That does not happen. But the reason it does not happen is that the Dutch and Venetian oligarchs find even they find Marlborough has cost them too much in wealth and also in the lives of their forces. Like Churchill did for the Americans, launching such disastrous campaigns as primarily Italy and others in World War II. But Marlborough plays a very similar role. But Marlborough would certainly have his wife had been an intimate of Queen Anne in the court, his wife Sarah, for a long time. So they again, circumstantially, are in a very strong position to expedite the death of the Queen once the Electress Sophia is out of the way. And they believe they are, as one says in cricketing parlance in England, on a stronger wicket, that they have a stronger political base with which to manipulate George once Queen Anne, who has turned sour against Marlborough and sour against the war against France, once she is out of the way.
Yeah.
Always appreciate these contributions, Marty. Did you have a thought on that, or did you just want to take that in, Uwe?
Yeah, I have to take it in. It's as Marty, I'm always impressed by your speed of thinking, and it's so much more experienced than mine, and it's a challenge. I will have to think about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. I'll just couple of quick thoughts that just entered my mind just listening to you go off there. Queen Anne, I was just Googling it. She had 17 miscarriages. I think that's a world record for all queens ever. Not a single one of her 17 children survived past like a year of age. Not even miscarriages, but the babies sometimes made it out and they just died really early. Or maybe they were miscarriages. Point being, that's a lot. That's a lot of dead babies. So that brings one to also, I think, inquire into what kind of cooks were under the employ of the British Crown at that time. The other thing about the Duke of Marlborough, just to be reminded how it's really kept in the family, and there's this continuity of very bad behavior that's been passed down or groomed into the next generation, but none other. I think everyone knows of the Five Eyes under the control of the GCHQ, but the NSA, which is the American branch of the Five Eyes in the USA itself, was formerly known as the Black Chamber, and the Black Chamber was set up in 1918 by none other than Marlborough Churchill, a distant cousin of Winston, whose namesake was the character that we were just referring to just now, and he was a prodigy of Cloud Dancy, who set up the deputy director of MI5, who set up the what became essentially modern U.S. military intelligence. So that's just an interesting little point of continuity to just float as a piece of trivia in the background, I guess. But yeah, I just want to throw that out there as some factoids. Gerald Petchnook had a thought or contribution to share. Gerald, go for it.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks to Uwe and thanks to you, Matt. I would want to start on the opposite end of Martin, who started way back when, which is great, fantastic, because his knowledge is, like you guys said, is unbelievable. but I want to start in the future. As Mindy wrote an article that actually caught Lyndon LaRouche's attention, and he, we were like organizers, raising money, calling people, running for office. And she wrote an article about how the future determines the present and demonstrated it in Mozart's Ave Verum and other pieces. So I'm going to try to take that musical lesson, which Lyndon LaRouche appreciated, and had her do a presentation on it at one of our conferences. I want to start off with July 4th, 2026, which is 250th anniversary of the United States, and is already an agreement to have like a World's Fair in Des Moines, Iowa. Trump was out there Friday, July 3rd, preparing it. Now, here's the beauty of this idea. Schiller wrote William Tell, his last play, as a gift to the New World, to the United States. If something like, I don't know how to do it, we could give a gift again of this history that you so richly developed as a present to the United States for the 250th anniversary, some memento. And what I wrote in the chat in 1995, so it's what, 30 years ago, myself and a couple of people who were based in Chicago went to a German/Swiss city in Wisconsin called New Glarus, where since 1938, Wilhelm Tell had been presented, and still is, every year in German, in Swiss, and in English. 3 performances by the townspeople. And it was so authentic, the horses coming, and it was like in a glen. It was beautiful. And it was apparently the family from Massachusetts, the Mather family, somehow from Massachusetts, that funded this play happening. It's the only place in the U.S. it's going on. So the history that we've learned, it doesn't come from the schools. It doesn't come from the academics. It mostly comes from families, word of mouth. I had a teacher who told me this, and then I investigated. So I just want to say a couple of things about Lyndon LaRouche, which is, and this was striking in the very beginning when you said you began this because of your friend, I think her name was Vera. Was that the right name, Vera?
Yes.
I joined Lynn 1973, Mindy and I, 73. And the organization was in New York around Columbia University, a little up and down the East Coast. And it was mostly Jewish kids like myself. The organization was, LaRouche was referred to as a Jewish conspiracy because most of us were concerned about what happened, Nazi Germany, Hitler, World War II. And what LaRouche was able to show is it wasn't really a German thing. It was a financial Shaktian thing. And Horace Yelmar Greeley Schacht was born where I was born, in Brooklyn, New York. So that's what made LaRouche such a threat, because he showed that the economics of Shaktian austerity, and he had a famous debate where Mindy was going to school at Queens College, and he showed that this guy who said, if they only had listened to Schacht, Hitler would not have been necessary, and it was a debate in front of 1,000 people. And all the big shots in New York told LaRouche after that debate, I forget what was the name of the guy, Mindy?
Abel Lerner.
Abel Lerner was the economist. He was the champion of the Keynesians, and LaRouche showed the Keynesians and the Schachtians were the same. So they said to LaRouche, one of the wise guys in New York said, Mr. LaRouche, you just debated our expert. Yes, I did. And you made him look like a fool. You made him defend Schacht. Yes, I did. Well, that's what he thinks. Well, guess what, LaRouche? Because you won the debate in front of 1,000 people, you lost. You lost. We will never allow you another debate in public. And that's why I joined. Because if this guy was telling the truth about this is like unbelievable. Yeah. You know, this really. So I just wanted to point that out. I could say a lot more, but time is of the essence. So let's think in terms of putting some of what you just presented, which is incredible. I mean, we were doing this as an organization till we got attacked for being too successful, and LaRouche ended up in the can. And you know, there's not a lot to say about it, but I'll just say this is a very valuable thing. I especially appreciate what you said about music. Mindy followed up the class she gave a few weeks ago with a class on Don Giovanni, Mozart, and the American Revolution, which I think will be something to consider for the future here, because it is the power of classical music, Shakespeare, drama, everything like that. It's a republic. Yep. Last thing, Trump family is from Germany, Kollenstadt. And Roger Stone had to make a video, Ich bin ein Kollenstadter. He never used it, but he did make a video. So this German, American, and really universal, you know, like Furtwängler, you know, he should have been in the U.S. They ran him out twice, New York and Chicago, because the classical universal culture of Germany is really the culture of the United States in many ways. Mm-hmm. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Gerald. Yeah, I was also shocked that Schiller, when Uwe brought to my attention that Schiller was considering moving to the United States, I was blown away. I knew that Goethe was toying with the idea later on, but the idea that Schiller was doing it, didn't know. And I also didn't know that, I knew that there were similarities in spirit of Wilhelm Furtwängler, Wilhelm Tell, and the spirit of 1776, but the idea that Schiller was actually giving a gift to the United States, to the new republic, that was a new idea for me as well. So yeah, definitely. And I think that doing something more explicitly on Wilhelm Tell for the 250th anniversary is a great idea. Uwe, was there anything you wanted to say in regards to Gerald's thoughts?
Only so much that last time when Mindy spoke, I already posted the link to the excellent presentation about the Upper Verum in the chat back then. I have not been able to look it up now in the meantime, but I can only recommend to people to really go and watch this 45 or 50 minutes long presentation from the 90s. It's so good and it's so inspiring. It's really, thank you, Mindy, for this.
Yep, absolutely. Oh, there she is. Hey, Mindy. Hey. All right. I noticed that Jonathan, your son-in-law, Jonathan, our good friend, has been waiting for a while in the chat to pose a question to you. So, Jonathan, just take yourself off of mute, and you could share your thought.
Okay. I wasn't ready to speak in English. Yeah, so I wrote my question right in the chat. It's like when I see all the connections you show us there, Uwe, in what I see is there in the earlier days there was a much bigger connection between Europe and the United States. When I look in the past centuries, there isn't such a big connections like in the early days, like in the 18th century. And so do you see in a history a point or a period of time where this network has shrunk?
So thanks, Jonathan. I think it has to do with the power of the American idea, of the American project, of this this concept of really focusing on making sure that people have a chance to pursue happiness in the true meaning. This power became obvious, and therefore it had to be reversed. And it became reversed at the latest, at the beginning of the 1900s, so the 20th century, with Theodore Roosevelt becoming president and the people around him gaining influence, and then the setting up of the Federal Reserve. And since then, I think we have seen deliberate attempts to make America an empire itself, so that it becomes ugly, and it becomes something which people think become aggressive in about, what we see these days in America and even in Germany in 1945. After that, there was this movie. It was a comedian sort of movie, but it was Ami Go Home, and this was long before the Vietnam War. So therefore, it is something which has gained traction. And I've said it before, it is exactly this difficulty that those of us who are not Americans, but who understand that it is important to focus on what it really was, which the founding fathers, or at least the majority of the founding fathers were trying to achieve. This has to be re-identified, relearned, and recharged. And this whole imperialism is just another way of making sure that maybe, I wouldn't be surprised if someone was thinking of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of the Independence being the last one. So this is something which still many people, I believe, in some places with an oligarchical mindset, are so obsessed with to get away with this great idea. And this is the task for us to reconnect, if we haven't stayed true to it anyway. So that's what I can say.
Yeah, amen. Did you have a follow-up with that, Jonathan?
Oh, thank you.
Cool. Well, I'm looking at the clock. I'm seeing that we're running close to 4 p.m. Eastern time. Richard just made a point, don't forget about the music. I think he's really hungry to hear some glass harmonica. So if you have a selection you'd like to pull out, now might be a good time.
Yeah, I can, but I need to, because I've received so much praise for what I've presented, and let me just stress again, what I've presented is just a collection of material which had been out there already, and much of it came from the LaRouche organization. So this is Graham Lowry's book, of course, How the Nation Was Won. It's Graham Lowry's and Anton Chaikin's presentation about the anti-Newtonian roots of the American Revolution from 1996. It's Philip Valenti's write-up in 1995. It's Michelle Rasmussen's Bach, Mozart and the Musical Midwife in 2001. It's David Shaven, Mozart and the American Revolution, the Upsurge in 1992. It's Edward Spanos, Nancy Spanos. So Edward with this piece, Leibniz, Halle and the American Revolution. So this is something which I am indebted to. Sam Labrier is here. His talk about Leibniz has inspired me in the first place to really look into this. It's so much stuff which I have been drawing on, and I just want to say thank you to those people because they've been doing most of the work, and I've just used a little bit of technical applications to maybe show it in a different way. But now let's finish with this talk with this piece of Mozart. I need to screen share again. Hang on.
And don't forget to share the sound as well.
Yep. Hang on. Screen share. There we go. Video. Okay.
So this is the instrument invented by Benjamin Franklin, and
yes,
which Mozart composed a piece of music to accompany.
Yes. Okay. Yes. It's the Adagio and Rondo for glass harmonica. Flute. Hang on, I can't translate now. It would take too long.
Nope.
Oh.
Nope.
Oops. Hang on. I need to screen share. It's this.
Yeah, that was a very lawful ending to this little gestalt, this great composition. Thank you, Uwe. And thank you everybody for joining us again for this journey of discoveries. And I really got a lot out of this. So I hope everyone is inspired. If you have not yet read Graham Lowry's How the Nation Was Won, Volume 1, I hope this class inspired you to do so. The link to purchase the book or to, I think, even access it, it's available for free on archive.org. I think Graham would be happy to know that people are accessing his book, even if it's for free. So I'll make a link to that in the description box. And for those references that Uwe enunciated that inspired him, I'll also include a playlist of articles and classes that Uwe had listed out for those who want to do more deep digging. Also, I'm very happy that Mindy is continuing her journey in expositions, and so we'll have to have a conversation about a follow-up to your previous class in the coming weeks or months ahead. That would be, I think, very fun too. So yeah, I saw that thumbs up. Excellent. Thank you, everybody. And next week, we're going to have Cynthia Chung, who's going to go through her work. She's currently publishing a series on the Real American System, Henry C. Carey, and a lot more. So that'll be next Sunday, same time, 2 p.m. And look forward to meeting everybody here. Before that, we're going to have the Pluralia Dialogos at 11 a.m. Eastern time. I think that Ray McGovern said he wants to come on. We had some technical issues last week, so hopefully we'll figure that out. And Ray McGovern and some other surprise guests will be available for that Pluralia Dialogos. So that's 11 a.m. Eastern time next Sunday, followed by Cynthia's class for the RTF. So thank you, everybody. Till next time.